Welcome to Take the Lead Radio with Dr. Diane Hamilton, where she interviews some of the most successful leaders, entrepreneurs, authors, speakers, and other individuals who will inspire you to take the lead in your career and personal life. And now, here is Dr. Diane Hamilton.
Welcome to Take the Lead Radio. This is Dr. Diane Hamilton, and we've got a very interesting show today because all our guests have had experience with nonprofits. First of all, we have Dr. Mindy Gewirtz, who is a co-founder of 2 nonprofits and a for-profit company. And then we have Vivien Hoexter, and who has co-written a book with her partner, Linda C. Hartley, and they're the authors of Big Impact, Insights and Stories from America's Nonprofit Leaders. So today we're going to talk a little bit about nonprofits, but we're also going to talk about personality assessment, business, and leadership in all areas of it. So it'll be an interesting show, and I hope you stick tuned because we'll be back right after this. Robots, self-driving transportation, and a dynamically connected cross-cultural virtual world will define the workplace of tomorrow. However, education today is mainly focused on technical learning and standardized testing. Is this preparing kids for future leadership? Unfortunately, not so much. That's why LeaderKid Academy offers programs based on the persona model and focuses on developing emotional intelligence, project management, change management, mindfulness, assertiveness, ethical leadership, resilience, creativity and innovation, and presentation skills. LeaderKid Academy offers educator mentoring and training workshops, after-school programs, and ongoing sessions. Unleash the leader in your kid. To learn more, visit leaderkid.org. That's leaderkid.org. I am here with Dr. Mindy Gewirtz, who's the co-founder of 2 nonprofits and for-profit companies. Her experience as executive team member of a large nonprofit and entrepreneurial engagements provide a framework for integrating client growth with business results. Entrepreneurship and innovation are also an active part of Mindy's client portfolio. Mindy consulted to the CEO and became a co-founder of 7AC, a waste heat-driven cooling and heating clean tech firm. She's actively coached early-stage entrepreneurs. Mindy also gives back to the entrepreneurial community, having been an active member in the Babson's MBA program, Boston University's MBA Kindle Business Competition, and the National Clean Tech Open. It's nice to have you here, Mindy.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here.
Well, this is going to be fun. I think, we chatted before. I said I'm interested in your experience in neuroscience-based coaching, managing stress, conflict, decision-making, personality assessments, like the Hogan Suite and MBTI, and all the stuff you do, because I write about personality assessments, and I wrote a dissertation on emotional intelligence and have an MBTI and all that qualification. And I'm very interested in how you got into all that.
Into the neuroscience piece of it,
right?
The assessment piece of it. Well, I'm currently taking a certification with Judith E. Glazer, who just had written a book. It's her 7th book called Conversational Intelligence, which has really been a Times bestseller book. And she has been coaching coaches around the world for the last 2 years, actually, and certifying coaches as well for the last 2 years. And what really was fascinating to me about the conversational intelligence coaching is that it's all neuroscience based.
Yeah, that would be great.
That we now understand how the brain works and how we can help people change on the basis of the neuroscience. And when I tried it with my clients, they were fascinated with the neuroscience because I work a lot with engineers and scientists, and they just eat it up.
Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of interesting. What do you mean by conversational intelligence? Maybe we should start with that because it is a fascinating thing to discuss.
Yes, it's really a methodology where people learn how to make their conversations, in a sense, match the intent with the impact. It's very simple. 9 out of 10 conversations fail to reach the intention that they had in terms of making an impact. 9 out of 10.
Wow.
And 75% of all the work we do is through conversations,
Right.
especially in our information economy and our post-information economy. It's all about the conversations that we have. And we think that we are all talking and everybody understands what we are saying.
Right.
And that they're all listening with the same ears. Well, we heard the same thing.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So I had a client who is known to be a manager of few words, as he describes himself, and others describe him, somewhat affectionately, somewhat annoyingly. And he said to me, Mindy, I have to cancel our appointment that's coming up. And I saw because that time won't work for me. But he doesn't give me anything about, well, it's just the hour, it's just the day. Mm-hmm. So I have to double click on that and say to him, okay, are you meaning just the hour? Are you meaning just the day? Are you meaning next week because you're, off to DC? Mm-hmm. And he writes back, no, it's fine. I just need to do it an hour before.
Ah.
And so that's one of the tools that we use. It's called double clicking.
I see. So do you find that people are just not specific enough when they're communicating?
Well, he thought that he was, very clear.
Right.
In his communication to me. But I had no clue what he was really specifically referring to. So you know how in a mouse we double click so something can be really made clear? So it's the same way here, where the way we could make something clear is to double click and to ask on it. And so I help my clients to use this kind of double clicking terminology, which people find actually, I thought people would find it kind of provocative or not comfortable to use. And instead I found it gives legitimacy to it. It's better than saying, so tell me more about what you mean by that. We have discovered is that we have actually 6 brains. And we always knew 6. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we always knew about the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is where we have where all of our thinking happens, all of our analytical thinking. That's kind of baby brain, an infant in comparison to the other brains that we have. Mm-hmm. And the other brains that we have that people are familiar with is kind of the amygdala. And the amygdala is where we have all our emotions. That's where the term amygdala hijack, that I think actually was Goldman, who had helped make it famous in emotional intelligence. Right. And that's where that, our emotions kind of take over. And what I love to say is that when our primitive brain takes over together with our amygdala, then guess what happens? They totally eat the prefrontal cortex for lunch. It's like because they are the old timers who have been around for millions of years longer than the prefrontal cortex. So, prefrontal cortex doesn't have at all a chance to be able to work. So what we have to do is see if we can find the triggers in the amygdala hijack situation, but we've got 0.07 seconds. That's it.
Wow.
And that's not a lot of time.
No.
The other brains, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm just curious, how do we do that then?
Yes. So what we used to think is that, we have willpower and we would do stuff like that. It's not true. Once we have an understanding of what our triggers are, so for example, when my boss yells at me in front of other people, in the office, my first reaction is to yell at him back.
Yeah.
And,
Right.
and we don't have the power in that situation.
Mhm.
It becomes a yelling match.
Mhm.
And that really doesn't work. But if you know what your trigger is, then what you can do is say, aha, he's going to trigger me again. Now, you can't stop the trigger from happening. All you can do is stop how you react to it.
Right.
So the way you stop and react to it is say, this is my trigger, and I choose to count to 10. And by the time I count to 10, take a few deep breaths. Anything that gets you beyond that 7.07 seconds,
Right.
so that your prefrontal cortex can kick in and actually you can make some sense out of it, and not fight back in the way that was, presented to you. And that kind of power that you have totally dissipates the fuel from the other side, because they're waiting for the fuel from your side to continue the fight. It's no fun.
Right.
If only one person is playing with the fight.
Right.
So in a sense, bad.
That's so true of I know a lot of people that if you engage them at all, that's exactly what they're looking for. And they want to fight, I guess, is the way to put it. So how do these people usually come back with additional ways to try to provoke you, or does that completely diffuse the situation?
No, it doesn't completely diffuse the situation at all, because very often people like that are what we call addicted to being right. And it's either my way or the highway.
Right.
And they have a very hard time understanding that there's any other way than their way. Now, we can work with them separately, but if it's someone that we're working with who has to deal with a boss like that, then the other strategies that we work with them is try to get them out of that kind of a position where they're constantly being confronted by this person. So once they know that person's triggers, and once they know their own triggers, then what they do is we have another tool for them. And the tool is called, beautifully enough, the ladder of conclusions. And the ladder of conclusions is we all make mind movies. So we all have mind movies of our own worlds. And they're not necessarily the worlds of other people. So when I get triggered by conversations, I have bioreactions. Very often the stomach feels it first. I feel it in my gut. Oh, there he goes again. And then I have feelings about that. I can't stand it. He's always hurting my feelings, right? And then I have thoughts about that. Maybe I should really quit this place. And, beliefs about that, and interpretations and assumptions that I'm making about it. He's a horrible person. He's a terrible person. And the conclusion is maybe, I should just get out of here. But at the other time, I'm really being paid well. I love my job. And, where am I going to find another job? So we are kind of going up this ladder of conclusions. So the first part of the ladder of conclusions is the bioreactions. We kind of get hit in the gut. We know it. Something's going on. And then come our feelings about, I'm always so hurt when he does it. I turn red. I feel hot. I feel like my whole life is really been disrupted by this boss of mine. Yeah. And it's part of the movie we make up. Yeah. Go ahead, Diane.
Yeah, no, I met a lot of people who feel that way, and it's very frustrating for them.
Yes. And then our thoughts really start to kick in, and our thoughts go something like this. He's a narcissist. He's a terrible person. Why am I even staying in this job? It's really, I'm the stupid one for staying in this job. And then you start beating yourself up for why you're staying in this job. And you have all sorts of beliefs now about yourself. Like no, sane person would stay in this job. And you start making all sorts of assumptions. He's got the power. You have no power here. So the conclusion is you got to go. But on the other hand, you love your job.
Mm-hmm.
It's a well-paying job. You absolutely adore the actual work that you're doing. And the question is, can you step down the ladder?
Mm-hmm.
Can you really, with the other person, sit down and share your story and he share his story? And can you understand each other's story and come up and appreciate and expand and share that story so that the two of you really come up perhaps with a different story?
Right. And that's a big part of having empathy is, being able to put yourself in somebody else's position and kind of really understand how they're feeling, right?
Yes. So part of the way we do this really is we set up a time that, you do this in private. You create a safe environment. And this for me, as having been a clinician for 20 years, is really very helpful. And you want to really be clear. And I'm clear, I do coaching, not therapy anymore. But it does, in a sense, help me with that.
I'll bet.
So really be clear on what the outcome is. The outcome is not to have a kind of dumping session about everything. The outcome is, I'm a good worker. I know you want to keep me, and I want to be here. How can the two of us really move forward so that my intention and your intention really match the impact that we both have? So you're aligned, If
Right.
he's not aligned and he doesn't want to keep you, forget it. You're at the end of your story. But if the two of you really are aligned around that, it's just the behavior you can't, deal with, then that's what you can do. So when you do the connection and you stay connected to the process of the situation, so you're able to have a healthy situation, then really what's happening is you let the person know that what you really want is very simply, you want to end up with a stronger relationship. So you share each other's stories and how it impacts you. You let him go up his ladder of conclusions, and you go up your ladder of conclusions, and you share with each other the impact that it has. The impact it has, for example, what really triggers the yelling for him? What makes him kind of go around that corner with the yelling? And you both listen without judgment. You both listen about the situation without just the facts, the feelings, the thoughts, but no judgment. That's the big piece. That's the secret to all of this.
I'm curious, with all this research that you're doing and understanding of all these different personality assessments and things, do you think that something like this would work with somebody like maybe Steve Jobs, who was, infamous for his personality issues?
Well, that's a very good question. When they say, how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? You know what the answer is?
No.
The answer is 1, but the light bulb has to want to change.
Right.
And my sense of Steve Jobs is he had no interest in changing.
You know what I think is interesting about him is so many people putting up with that. And why do you think people put up with that type of personality? Is it just the desire to be on something big because they know he's a genius and it's worth that? Or is it something else?
Well, aside from the masochists among us who don't mind that,
Right.
I think that people really recognize when someone is such a genius on such a different level, and especially techies who, what's the word I want to use that's respectful? The people side of things don't come to them so naturally.
The soft skills, the
Exactly.
interpersonal skills.
Yeah. So they're not used to that being a big.
That's not a big deal to them as much as other people, maybe, huh?
Exactly. So it's easier to get away in that kind of environment. However, it wouldn't be so easy with today's millennials.
Right. It would be interesting to see the difference. And he did learn a hard lesson. He got kicked out of his company, but coming back, he learned some lessons. And we use his case study a lot in the courses I teach because I still do quite a bit of teaching. And a lot of the college students look at him for personality issues in terms of emotional intelligence and other things. That's why I brought him up. And since you're an expert in a lot of this, I thought you'd find that something interesting. But I'm curious about your work with the Hogan Suite. I've never worked with that. What is that exactly?
Okay, so the Hogan Suite really is very fascinating. And the reason it's fascinating is because we have personality structures that we use 95% of the time. And we call that our sunny personality. But 5% of the time, we have what we call derailers. And the derailers are the ones that have tremendous impact. And so you always want to look at the things that actually derail a person on whatever it is that they are in for a job for. So if you see someone at a high risk for a particular behavior, then you know that means that person can really, in a stressful situation, show up with that kind of high level of risk. Then you have to know what you're getting yourself into around that. And some people, for example, are so reserved. You can be an introvert and a fabulous leader, but some people are absolutely so reserved and isolated and really don't want social contact. They cringe from that.
Right.
That's really hard for a leader, as opposed to someone who may be reserved and may like to take a book home instead of, going out there. But he'll send out his extrovert and he'll do it and he'll be okay. Just something simple like that. So learning to see where those high-risk places are really important, and also the one on values. We very often don't look at the values that leaders hold. And if it's a good fit in terms of values. So I was working with a client, and his value was commerce. Not one stitch around people.
Right.
Just all through commerce. And when I said that to him, he was, that is his value. And and it was his value. And it's good up to a point. It was a huge derailer.
Yeah, right.
To only be about commerce. So it highlights things, in particular when it's on an extreme place.
Right.
And the sunny side kind of situation is really nice. That's the HPI. And the HDS, in terms of the derailers, is really illuminating. And I find that the values part, which gets the littlest actually play, is the most valuable. And then you see how the values play out across the HPI and the HDS. And you see how they're a match, how people play out their values inside all of that. So I think that's important. I like to use also the MBTI.
Yeah, I use that one as well. I'm curious, what's your personality type on MBTI?
Oh, that's an easy guess. So I'm a very strong E, like
right.
off the charts E. I'm a very strong N.
Intuitive.
Percher. And it's fascinating by the T and the F. I'm in the middle.
You're in the middle?
But whenever you're in the middle, you're an F.
And why is that?
And it's a good question. That's how they mark it. So if you're right on the edge there, then they consider you an F. And I think that over time, I have moved more to the T side. So as I've left my clinical work, as I've left my leadership and not-for-profit management, and as I've gone into the entrepreneurial world and in the executive coaching world, I've gotten to be more of a T.
How about your J and P? What did you end up on that?
What do you guess?
I would say I'm giving you I don't know you well enough, but
I know you don't know me for more than 10 minutes.
But I don't know. I'm definitely
it's a J.
You're a J. I'm a J too.
Yeah, I think so.
Yes, TJ. And it's when you're talking about the TF part. On the scale, I had 0 F. Have you ever seen that? I've never seen that with
No.
No. I guess I don't make any of my decisions based on my values. So.
That's interesting. So.
Yeah. 0.
So you're a total T. You're an ESTJ?
I'm an ESTJ, yeah.
So ESTJs are wonderful. They are real doers.
Yeah,
we're big picture thinkers. But we need doers.
Right. And it was really good going through the Myers-Briggs training because they made us really appreciate the F or what you're opposing, dichotomy of things, and for me, understanding why people want to bring me cookies and do the things that the Fs like to do was really helpful to me because I'm like, I don't want cookies, but they like, for them, it makes them feel good to have somebody give them cookies or whatever the thing was, that we were talking about in the training. And,
yes.
And so I've tried to bring more cookies to Fs.
Oh, that's funny. But they never learned what to bring an S.
Yeah, it's tough.
Because for S's, cookies don't mean anything.
Yeah.
Completed projects. Right. That's good. Get your stuff in on time. That's good.
That J in me has to have everything like very structured. I am not very spontaneous, I have to admit. But this has been so fascinating, and it's so nice talking to you, Mindy. I think a lot of people would like to know more about how they can reach you and learn more about what you're doing. Can you share your websites or contact information?
Sure. My website is collaborative-networks.net. And with an S at the end. People always forget the S at the end.
Okay.
And and they can reach me by email at mgewirtz at collaborative-networks.net. And I have a Facebook page, I have a LinkedIn page, so they can follow me there as well. And I have a new venture, if we have 2 minutes to talk about that, I think is very exciting and people may want to know about it, or we have run out of time.
Well, we're almost out of time. If you could tell us real quick what it is.
Yeah, I've become a partner in an entrepreneurial venture called Fresh Biz. And what they do is they have a gaming-based entrepreneurial game board that is transformational for people
Awesome.
and helps them. Yeah. So
Mhm.
I use that in conjunction with the CIQ because it opens minds. It creates a mind shift that
Mhm.
you can really be someone else and do what it is you want to do in your life and career, which is really my goal, is to help people live the life and career that they want in their way. And I'll give you one simple message to leave you with.
Okay.
Think about a glass Hellman mayonnaise jar
Mhm.
and put a bunch of flies in it and cover the jar with little holes so they can breathe. Close it up for 72 hours. And they don't fly out.
Huh.
They don't fly out. They stay there. And their progeny stay there forever. So what happens is that their mindset stays there. And that's very much the same thing for us.
That's really interesting. I know you're in a public place, and I really
Yes.
appreciate that you were able to share
Yes.
that. But thank you again, Mindy, for
Yes.
being on the show. And we'll have to follow up with what you're working on.
Yes.
Thank you for
You're very welcome. It's a
And-
pleasure meeting you, Diane.
It was my pleasure. And we will be back right after this message. Have you met with your financial planner recently to discuss avoiding negative consequences in your retirement? How to prolong taking Social Security benefits, create additional funding streams, and avoid taking funds out of your portfolio are questions that individuals 62 and older should consider. However, it's never too early to know your options. Once spent, retirement portfolio funds are gone. However, a reverse mortgage will utilize some of the equity you've built up over time and still allow you to enjoy the benefit of living in and enjoying your home, as well as the ability to leave remaining equity to your heirs. It's time to explore this powerful tool and see why many of the greatest retirement researchers have embraced reverse mortgages. An elite certified reverse mortgage professional can help you explore the benefits of reverse mortgages. There's only 143 of them in the country. Find out how Nina Penny, who has this distinguished certification, can help you with your reverse mortgage and planning needs. You can reach her at nina@simplereversemortgage.net or call her at 480-635-2410, NMLS 168272, Arizona Wholesale Mortgage Incorporated 19254. I am here with Vivien Hoexter, who co-authored a book with Linda C. Hartley, and the book's called Big Impact: Insights and Stories from America's Nonprofit Leaders. Vivien is the principal of H2 Growth Strategies, LLC, which helps organizations create actionable strategic plans, build strong boards, and increases revenue to generate greater impact. This is going to be an interesting show, so I'm really looking forward to talking to you, Vivien. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure, and I'm really kind of fascinated with your book because I don't get a lot of nonprofit discussions on this show, and I work on a board of advisors for a nonprofit, and it's for Leader Kid Academy, which sometimes I talk about on the air. And I'm interested in what generated your and Linda's interest in writing a book where you interview a bunch of nonprofit leaders.
So Linda and I have spent much of our careers in the nonprofit sector, although we both have MBAs, mine in marketing and hers in management. Mm-hmm. And we formed our company, H2 Growth Strategies, a little over 2 years ago. And when we did that, we decided we wanted to kind of do a big project, if you will, to announce the creation of the firm. We worked with many nonprofit leaders during our careers, and we were really, really impressed by their wisdom and also by the fact that there didn't seem to be many books about nonprofit leadership as told by the nonprofit leaders themselves.
Right.
So you've got scores of books on corporate leadership, hundreds probably, mm-hmm. maybe thousands, mm-hmm. But very few on nonprofit leadership. And of course, there are many principles of nonprofit leadership that are the same or similar to the principles of for-profit leadership, but there are a few that are very different. And so we really wanted to highlight those and also to amplify the voices of the leaders that we interviewed, because not only are there not a lot of books about nonprofit leadership, but because nonprofits don't have the marketing and advertising budgets of large corporations, the stories of their successes are often not as well known as they should be.
So that must have been interesting trying to find the people for your book then. Did you have any difficulty finding people who wanted to share their stories?
No. This is one of the most surprising things, was how really easy it was to persuade these leaders, some of whom are very busy and very high-powered, like Stephen Heinz of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund and Larry Kramer of the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, how easy it was to convince them to speak to us. And we only had one or two, we interviewed nearly 50 leaders, and we only had one or two say that they couldn't do it, and I think that really was because they were just too busy.
Right.
So we were really, it was very affirming to have them say yes.
Well, how long did you spend with these interviews? I mean, was it a one-day thing? Did you call them on the phone? I'm just curious because it's a different format.
Right. So some of them, we started right after, in November of 2016, and so at a conference called the Independent Sector. So Independent Sector is an association of nonprofits and foundations, and we were able to talk with a number of leaders there in person, and some of the ones who are in New York we also talked to in person because we're based in New York. And then a lot of them we did on the phone, and they lasted anywhere from 30 to 90 minutes, depending on how much time the person had and how many words they used, right?
Right.
So we have all of this wonderful material, and we only were able to showcase 21 of the 50 in the book.
Yeah.
So.
It's got to be hard to pick who to leave in, and because I'm sure they all had great content, but I'm sure some of them probably had different things that kept them up at night that might have been a really good thing to share. I mean, was there like any kind of threaded ideas that they all had that you go, oh wow, I'm seeing a real trend here with things that maybe keep them up at night?
Well, because of the work that they do, and the fact that it was right after the 2016 election, a lot of them were very concerned about the state of our democracy and the kinds of programs, social programs that their clients benefit from. So that was one theme. Another was fundraising. So because particularly if you work in a nonprofit, and we interviewed both leaders of foundations and leaders of public charities, and the leaders of public charities are, like Goodwill Industries International, Share Our Strength. That I don't know any nonprofit leader who's not concerned about fundraising. I don't know any.
Yeah, it's
so
gotta be
that
huge,
was another theme.
Well, now, who would you even think this book is for? Is it just for nonprofit leaders, or can regular for-profit leaders get something from this book?
Of course, our primary audience is nonprofit and foundation leaders, but absolutely we think that most people can get something from this book because most people are either volunteers in nonprofits or donors to nonprofits. We're a very generous people, or they serve on the boards of nonprofits, as you do. So we really think that, and nonprofits are kind of, in many places, the churches, the synagogues, the whatever, form kind of the backbone of the community. With their soup kitchens and their training programs, and so nonprofits are really kind of infiltrate or are integrated into the lives the lives of our communities. And so we think most anyone who is interested in the health of their community and who wants even possibly to make social change themselves would benefit from the book. There's a lot of wisdom in this book that is universal.
Well, so what do you think was the most interesting thing you learned? I mean, what do you want to share with everybody about your findings? Is there anything that really stood out in your mind?
Yes. So there are many things, of course, but one that was particularly interesting to us. So the level of emotional intelligence of these leaders is truly remarkable. If I had to say, what's the one thing that distinguishes these folks, it is their level of emotional intelligence and self-awareness, and that and often, and this is another surprising thing, that emotional awareness, that emotional intelligence grew out of some sort of a tragedy in childhood, whether that was the early death of a parent, or in one case, a sister who has intellectual challenges, intellectual disabilities, or someone who was a foster child until she was adopted. So over almost 25% of the leaders we interviewed had something like that occur in their childhoods or relatively early in their lives. And we really think that to some extent they credit those tragedies with directing their life's course in terms of the work that they chose to do. The woman who was a foster child now runs the National Court-Appointed Special Advocates for Children, which appoints and trains volunteers to advocate for foster children in court. So that really stood out for
Right.
to us.
Well, that's interesting, the emotional intelligence aspect, because the company where I sit on the board is an emotional intelligence training company for K through 12 kids. So
oh, wow.
So that's a double whammy there, and that's good. And I because he really, the owner, the head of it is a husband and wife team, and they really have a great interest in helping give back, and I could see why that would be a common theme as well. But I am curious about the challenges you faced. I mean, how hard was it to do this? I mean, when you're writing this kind of a book, is this your first book, or do you have other books?
This is our first book. It may be our last book.
That's a lot of work, isn't it? I hear you.
Yeah. If you told us beforehand how much work it was going to be, I don't know that we would have done it. But of course, we're happy that we did. It's about almost 2 years, which I understand is actually not that long. And last year, I was pretty much tied to my desk for a good part.
I know. Every time I write a book, I think, it's almost like starting a company. If people told you what you'd have to go through, you'd never do it, right? So
Exactly.
It is. So okay. So these are interesting stories, and it's a good sized book. You've got quite a few stories in here, and I'm curious, is this something that somebody's going to read more than once? Is it kind of a reference, or is this a one-time read for you?
So we think it's a reference. Although some people have read it straight through and said that they enjoyed it, whatever. But when people ask me, sometimes it's clear to me that someone's not going to be able to read the whole book at one sitting. And so I will, depending on who the person is, I'll often say, well, I think you should read the Stephen Heinz interview, or the Brian McLaren interview, or and of course, even though we shouldn't have favorite ones, we do. If you want to be a social activist, right, you should read Evan Wolfson, the founder and president of Freedom to Marry. He's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And he spent 32 years working on gay marriage, starting with his law school thesis, and he lays out the steps that he had to take first at Lambda Legal, where they were litigating,
Right.
and then left Lambda Legal, and it's really a lesson in how to make social change. So there are different people who have different interests, right, will be interested in different stories.
So how do they use those stories to make a bigger impact?
Well, they can learn. So we discovered 7 principles of making social change by doing the interviews, and those principles have chapters that frame the book, and so the first one, if you like, I can go through them quickly.
Sure,
or
go ahead. Yeah.
talk a little bit about. I'll just say them first and then go back and talk about them. So the first is sharpen your leadership skills.
Mm-hmm.
The second, ensure your own house is in order. The third, be crystal clear about your goal, articulate it persuasively. The fourth, campaign on many fronts. The fifth, build broad-based coalitions. The sixth, persist. And the seventh, leverage your success. So those we think, and again, these are very, based on our research, these are the steps we think are necessary for making lasting social change. And they start with the individual, and work outward from the individual to the individual's organization, and then to the social sector, and then to society as a whole. And so that's the way they're ordered. And the first one is obvious, right? If you're going to be a leader, you need to sharpen your leadership skills, whether that's seeking out mentors or building emotional intelligence, or in some cases working in direct service as a way to really understand what's happening on the ground. And then the second, we say ensure your own house is in order, but what we mean by that is make sure your organization is as functional as it can be. And that includes things like recruiting talented, passionate employees and giving them autonomy in decision making. Surrounding yourself with, in fact, people who are smarter than you are.
Right.
And here's one that is maybe unique to the nonprofit sector. Invest time in managing your board, right? Because a nonprofit's going to have a board that's generally much larger than a corporate board.
Mm-hmm.
And most nonprofit leaders the really good ones understand that they have to spend probably at least 10% of their time managing their boards. And that will make the rest of their job easier, but often it's hard to find that time.
Right.
The third, be crystal clear about your goal, articulate it persuasively. So if you want to make change, right, you got to define the outcome specifically, and then frame it in a way that people can hear it and resonate with it. And so as an example, we'll take Share Our Strength, which many people have not heard of, but they've probably heard about No Kid Hungry,
right,
which is Share Our Strength's campaign to end childhood hunger in the U.S., and which is within a decade of achievement, believe it or not.
Wow.
And so, but that's it's specific, it's memorable. Our goal is No Kid Hungry, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So the fourth and fifth are related. The fourth is campaign on many fronts. The fifth is build broad-based coalitions. So campaigning on many fronts, by that we mean, I sort of alluded to this when I was talking about Evan Wolfson and the Campaign for Gay Marriage, because litigation is one tool, but it's not the only tool. You have to find common ground. In many cases, you have to change social norms, right, to make real lasting change. And again, in the case of freedom to marry, the messaging went from it's about rights to it's about love, right? It's about having people being free to love the person they want to love. And that resonated much more with the public than the idea of rights when it came to love. And of course, advocacy is a huge part of making social change in pretty much any situation. So building broad-based coalitions, nonprofits are often quite isolated, and they tend to look inward. But the most successful ones are seeking partnerships of all kinds. And I sometimes talk about how the nonprofit sector, it employs about 10% of the U.S. workforce, so it's not an insignificant percentage.
Right.
But the rest is government and the private sector. And to make real social change, nonprofits have to eventually sort of turn over or they'd have to work with the government and private sectors to really have broad-based adoption of their causes. And so partnerships are critical. And including communities of faith is critical. Earlier I talked about how in some small towns, communities of faith are kind of the largest nonprofits.
Right.
And so it's very, very important to include those in any or most campaigns to create change. Then the sixth is one of my favorites, right? It's persist.
Mm-hmm.
So Evan Wolfson persisted for 32 years, and it took a lot longer than that. And suffrage for women took a lot longer than 32 years. So pretty much anything that's worth doing in this arena is going to take time. And one of my favorite ideas or things that we learned is, winning's better than losing, obviously, right? But you have to accept that you can't win everything, right? Mm-hmm. But when you lose, you try to lose forward, meaning that if you have if you know that your issue is not going to be popular in a particular area of the country, and you ignore that area because you think you can't win there, that's not a good idea. Because even if you can't quote unquote win, you can make some headway, and that's what we mean by lose forward.
Right.
And that's a very important premise of making change, right? Is that you really have to kind of not just focus on the places where you can win. And finally, the seventh is leverage your success, train others, work toward organizational sustainability. If you're lucky enough to actually achieve your goal, then what's the next challenge? So in the case of Share Our Strength and No Kid Hungry, the leader of Share Our Strength, Billy Shore, is already thinking about what Share Our Strength will do after it's ended childhood hunger in the U.S. Will it go overseas, right, and try to work overseas, recognizing that that's much more complicated?
Right.
He's not sure yet, but he's already thinking about what the next challenge should be for his organization. So that's a little about, I went through them really fast, Diane, but that's a little about the principles. And so that's really what we learned, right, in the largest sense, was here's what successful change makers are doing, and here's how you can learn from them, and here's what you can learn.
Well, it's a little reminiscent of Coveys Habits, the being proactive, sharpen your saw. Did you feel that you were hearing those kind of things?
Well, yes, we definitely. Yeah, but Covey is really more about. I love Covey. Really more about the individual, right? Now the individual there is out in the world, but Covey is really not about making social change.
Right.
It's about being a more effective and happier person, right, and leader. And so I can't say we weren't influenced by him, but because even after 25 years, right, it's one of my favorite books in the sort of self-help arena.
Mm-hmm.
But we're kind of taking it in a different direction a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
Although you're right.
Yeah, I think a lot of those principles guide the directions of overall groups, like the company. And I think it's really interesting to look at. I'm just curious for what you find that people. What's their biggest misconceptions about nonprofits? Are there any?
Biggest misconceptions? Yeah, no, there are lots. Because
I would think so, but I just want to make sure. I think a lot of people get confused. But go ahead.
So I think one of the biggest misconceptions has to do with the worth of nonprofit employees and how they're paid.
Yeah.
So you may be familiar with Dan Pallotta. So he has this great TED Talk about how the work that people in the nonprofit sector do is valuable. And if you want smart people to work on our biggest social problems, you have to pay them fairly. And how the way in general that nonprofit employees are paid is not sustainable and will not retain the best talent. So I think that there's a misconception that if you want to do good, you have to suffer.
Yeah. Right. You have to pay for it. Huh?
So that's one of the biggest misconceptions, I would say.
Yeah, I would think.
Another has to do with fundraising. So I think, because I and my partner have spent our whole careers pretty much fundraising.
Right.
So I think that one of the biggest misconceptions is that you can go out and ask a wealthy person who's never heard of your organization until now for $1 million in the first meeting and get it.
Wow. That's,
So
how often does that happen?
Well, I can't say it never happens.
Yeah, right.
but it certainly doesn't happen often.
Right. And
I think that fundraisers often get kind of a bad rap if they join an organization and don't raise $1 million in the first, 6 months, whatever. Because fundraising is like sales in the sense that
very much,
it is sales, right? You have to build a relationship. If you're talking about a big ticket item, right? You have to build a relationship with your prospect, and you have to bring them to you. If you have a school or a soup kitchen or whatever, you have to bring them there. And if they don't have the time to come, you have to take your clients to them, and you have to maybe invite them to events and have them meet multiple people from the organization and give you advice, right? Because asking for advice is one of the best ways to raise money.
Right.
So and it could take a while if you're talking about a large gift. And I think people don't appreciate that. Many people, not all, but many people don't. They just don't understand.
That it is very challenging, and it seems like you guys have addressed so many really great topics in this book, and I think there's a lot of people who listen to my show that would like to know more because we don't get a lot of nonprofit discussions here. And I think this was really timely and a good overall look at everything. And if you could share with how people can find your book or reach you guys, that would be wonderful.
Sure. So the best way is to go to our website, which is www.2 and the word growth, growth.com. So h2growth.com. That's the best way to find out all about us and the book.
Well, thank you so much, Vivien. It's so nice to have you on the show. I wish we could have had Linda too, maybe next time, but it was so wonderful. And we will be back right after this message. Robots, self-driving transportation, and a dynamically connected cross-cultural virtual world will define the workplace of tomorrow. However, education today is mainly focused on technical learning and standardized testing. Is this preparing kids for future leadership? Unfortunately, not so much. That's why Leader Kid Academy offers programs based on the persona model and focuses on developing emotional intelligence, project management, change management, mindfulness, assertiveness, ethical leadership, resilience, creativity and innovation, and presentation skills. Leader Kid Academy offers educator mentoring and training workshops, after-school programs, and ongoing sessions. Unleash the leader in your kid. To learn more, visit leaderkid.org.